So that we call, in art of hosting, the call. Looks like this in Swedish. So this is the moment when a friend of ours said, I always thought somebody should do something about that until I realized my name is somebody. Does that happen to anybody here? Yes? Oh, somebody's smiling, so it must have. So this is the moment of finding out who's the calling team and finding out what the call is. The interesting thing about this moment is whatever this disturbance is can come and try to kind of attach itself to you. And then you usually try to get rid of it, so try to get rid of me. Okay, that works for a little bit, but no. Oh. And then you can try to give it to somebody else. I'm interested he didn't try to give me to somebody else. But usually you know it's your call because it doesn't go away. There is something that stays there. So in an organizational structure, you can get given the call by somebody else. You have to organize this meeting. You need to do something about that. But in life, also, there's moments when you get the call. Sweden 3.0 was a call for Kaizen, something that wouldn't go away. I have to act on this. And we're going to lay this story on top of this diagram. So it's an interesting thing. If something is going to happen, then somebody needs to stand for it. Somebody needs to commit to it, or it's not going to happen. And the reason for calling teams being interesting, the reason to have more than one person doing something is, as we said before, it takes a field to host a field. If you want to make big change happen, you need to be not alone, but with other people in order to have enough energy to make something happen. So who will stand with you? Who's going to be on this team with you? This is a moment we call of deep sensing. It's really that getting very close to what is this really about? What does it mean for me? What is my role? What is mine to do? I think that's one of the most important questions in the world right now. What is mine to do? Your parents wanted you to do something. Your family wants you to do something. Everybody wants you to do something, but what is yours to do? It's a time in the world to say no to a lot of stuff, because the world wants us to do more stuff and do more stuff. But there's time to say, what is mine to do? What is that call that only I can answer? And then it's about saying, what is that call? What is the thing that's at the middle here, and who is going to be with me in making sure that this happens? Who are the other calling team? Who can help me hold this? Who can stay by the fire and keep poking the fire long enough so that the flames are still there? Because to do big work, it takes having enough fire to get to the end of it. Too much fire means burnout. Maybe you know somebody who's suffered from burnout. They just did too much or got too overwhelmed and didn't have anybody with them to balance that. So what can help you? So this is where you really name what it is you want to be doing. And this we call the birth of the callers. This is the moment when the team comes together. Who is going to stand there? And then comes that moment of clarifying. What do we really mean? What is this called? And in art of hosting, we work very often with the calling question. We think it's more powerful to have a question at the center of something than to have a statement. Even a vision, a mission statement somehow is not as powerful as a question. A question can keep calling you into the inquiry, keep giving you things to look at, keep inviting other people in. So what is this thing really called? This is the clarity of the core, and we say that purpose is the invisible leader in the center. If you're not clear of your purpose, you can meander everywhere. But once the purpose is clear, it helps to guide you. It helps to keep things aligned and keep you focused to keep going. Now, I want to warn you, I'm laying this out as if it's a linear process. But guess what? Yeah, you guessed it. It's not. So you could be coming along here and thinking, well, I know what's going on in something. No. I have to go back here and be a bit more clear and find out who's standing with you. And then maybe I have to go a little bit again. So no process is linear. The other thing is these breaths are going to look like they're separate, but they're actually overlapping. There is a moment when you're getting to the end of one, but the next one is opening. So it's an interesting challenge to actually keep going while there's complexity of something happening. One thing is beginning to close, the next thing is beginning to open, which is always the way it is with breathing. So in this stage of clarifying, that's where we get clear about the clarifying question. What is it we're actually, what are we inquiring about what is at the center of what we're doing. This is when we are driving for collective clarity of purpose. This is when we have a talk about principles. If we're working together as a team, how do we want to work together? I've found working with teams often there, let's get on to the task, we know what we have to do, we don't have time for that team building stuff. But then when they get into a challenge, they begin to fall apart because there's no foundation for them to stay together. It makes sense to create some foundation to say, how are we going to work together? And if we get into conflict, how are we going to work on that? So I often talk about the difference between the Japanese and the US management technique. US management technique, bang, and then falls apart. Because we get started really fast, we never talk about how we're doing that. Japanese management technique, exactly the opposite. Talk, bang. Takes the same amount of time, actually, but the second one is a much more grounded way of we trust each other, we know what we're doing, and then we can immediately move. So, what do you do with that? And we talk about working, and our organizing principle looks like this in our device. This comes from the martial arts practice. We use the square, the circle, and the triangle. The square are your principles, your governance, the frame of what you're doing. And in a martial arts tradition, that would be the mat you're practicing on. That gives you the boundary or the border of where your practice field is. The circle, we come back to the circle with our purpose at the center to check in with each other. What are we doing? Are we still clear? Are we still focused? And then we have triangles, these little groups of people who go off and do something, come back to the center, tell us about it, go off, do. So we don't all have to sit and decide everything. We can move faster if we built enough trust to know what the core is, to enable you four, can you please go off and create the budget and then come back and let's talk about it. And can you guys maybe go out and figure out who some of our stakeholders are, go talk to them, find out what they're interested in, come back and tell us about it. So we can move faster when we use structures that are enabling for us to use self-organizing well. But I found in a lot of structures, they don't trust each other enough or they're not clear enough to enable people to go off and do some work and then come back and report on it. So it takes a lot longer, it feels like. This meeting has so much logistics, I can't stand it. When somebody could go off and work on that one. So that's something we use as our operating system. Then we have a breath called invite. This is where people are coming in. And this breath looks like one, but there's actually multiple little breaths inside of this. There's at least 3 inside of here. So number one, we need to figure out who are our stakeholders. Who should be participating in this process? And we really talk about if it's about them, don't do it without them. So how many processes have there been about children where there's no children in the room at all? Or it's about whoever, and whoever is not in the room. But why not? Because if they're going to have to live with what we decide, why aren't they there with it? I used to work for the New Zealand Tourism Board. I have been a public servant, oh my goodness. And I had a colleague who used to have a little sign in his plant on the desk, and it said, flying a desk is a bad place for making good decisions. Meaning, if you never go away from your desk, if you never go out and talk to the people who you're impacting, how can you make the policy? You don't know where it's going or how they feel about it.
Excuse me.
So,
Excuse me. Can you say again, flying from the desk?
flying a desk is a bad place for making good decisions. I looked at this sign for a while and I had to ask him about it. But he said he realized very many policymakers only stay in the office. They never go and talk to anybody. So they have lots of research at their fingertips, but they've never talked to the live people who are going to be living with the result of their policy. So the invitation phase is when we look at who are the stakeholders, who needs to be involved in this, whose voice needs to be in the room, who needs to be in the planning, who needs to be talked to, all that kind of stuff. And that helps us to know what is the harvest we want to have out of this. This is where hosting and harvesting come in. So what is the harvest we want to come out of whatever it is we're designing? And that indicates to us what the design should be. So it's not we do the plan first and decide how we're going to harvest it. It's the other way around. What tangible harvest do we want to come out of this? Here's a tangible harvest. But what intangible harvest do we also want to come out of this? I was in the room one day when a young friend turned to an older friend and said to him, I am your harvest. I am the harvest of your work. That was such a powerful moment. Because that was the intangible harvest. You can't see that. Well, you can see him. But he's not going around with the label, I'm the harvest on. So he is the intangible harvest of process work. And this is also when you have to decide what space, what's the venue. So the next breath we have is called a meeting. But this meeting might be a physical meeting, it might be an online meeting, it might be happening in any other form. We're just using this word as a placeholder. This is meeting. So here in the invitation is the art of invitation. How do you invite people so that they're stepping in ready to begin? There is an artistry in good invitation. Not just the meeting's on at 4 o'clock, but can you give me something to think about beforehand? Can I prepare myself well? How are you helping me step in so that I can be an engaged contributor, not just I turn up going, why am I here? Which a lot of people are actually secretly doing. Why am I here? Oh, God. And they're asking themselves, why do we always meet and nothing ever happens? So this is the time for the art of invitation, the art of organizing. So the groundwork team was talking to you something about how do we influence the learning space and the ability of people to step in because they're supported and they contain. And it's about designing for the harvest. So then we have the meeting. This is about the participants coming together. It's about creating a field. So when people work on stuff together, they become connected in a different way than if they're just asked to comment on something, right? So, and this is where we do our harvesting real time. So we've made the plan. We think we know what we want to harvest, but there's also emergence happening at that moment. So Elin and her team were planning before we got here about what we think the harvest could be and how that might look. But of course, anything happens in the moment because you are here. Hey, the human component means that there's emergence. And we don't know exactly what's going to happen. If you maybe noticed that, you can invite people to do whatever it is, and there's always somebody who never does that. I've tried briefing people by speaking to them, by writing it, by showing it, and always there's somebody who's doing something different because they're human. So this is the moment when we can come together and work on stuff. So this is where all of our methods come into play. So we have worked with this time. Circle briefly, we've not shown you circle in its totality, but circle is very strong for sitting around the purpose, having the purpose at the center, and really seeing each other and seeing the whole of us as a community. World Cafe, open space, appreciative inquiry, storytelling, all of these methodologies you have at your fingertips, and many more. You might want to be using Theory U or any of this other things that are happening, or something you're really good at. So this is the moment when the design comes into play. What are you going to use to help people work well together and be learning together?